Hi, this is the Lorraine grandmother clock that was built from scratch from plans that came from Clock Kit. What I'm going to show real quick is just my method for doing the polyurethane. I know that it's a problem for a lot of people. It's a lot of problem for me too, because it tends to sag and run a lot as you're putting the coat of it on, and even with putting it on extremely thin, it still tends to sag and run, so you have to keep going back over it as it's drying and make sure that there's no any of those bubbles or sags or anything. I like to use a foam brush. A lot of people say they can't use a foam brush with polyurethane, but I find that I can't use a bristled brush with polyurethane because the foam brush with that tip on there, it's got a nice pointed tip and it's flat across the front. You can use it very effectively to get into the corners, which is where a lot of the bubbles tend to accumulate, and then you can use the flat wide part to kind of pull the bubbles out. I think the key to getting the polyurethane on evenly and without running and without having a lot of bubbles is you really have to put it on very sparingly, at least to begin with. I do make sure that it gets a good solid coat. You need to keep lights around. You'll see, Melanie, if you'll pan kind of around, there's lights all over the place in here to get it at different angles, and I even have lights in the garage door, so that helps let daylight in too. Gets rid of all of the shadows that you might see otherwise. So what I do is I go ahead and move the brush, whether it be bristled or foam, fairly slowly, because it will generate bubbles if you move quickly with it. But I go back and forth. Again, that's kind of a violation of what you see on a lot of instructions where they say only go in one direction with it. But I find that in going back and forth, I have better luck at getting a good even coating with the grain, because it could push it in one direction and not the other otherwise, even though I do like to brush with the grain. So you just do a full coating of the entire thing and try to keep yourself situated so that you always have a light that you can look towards but not right at, because it'll blind you otherwise. And that way you can see exactly where everything is going on. See here with this nice point here, you can get down into those corners without getting an excess amount of the polyurethane laying on the wood. If you just had a bristled brush, it'd be pretty hard to get that in there, and it tends to, if you keep the polyurethane thin enough on the bristled brush so that you're not just globbing it all over the place, it makes it hard to get a good even coat, I find, most of the time. I'm sure that there's a lot of experts out there that are better than I am that'll argue and could demonstrate otherwise, but this is what works for me. So I just go through, put a good solid coat on that I can see. I don't know, Melanie, if you can see the glare, but if you come over in this direction and film it from this perspective, you might be able to see where you can tell that it's a wet coat everywhere, and you'll be able to see if there's any areas it's easy to get a dry spot that you miss. And particularly on this coat here, which is my last coat, okay, that's good, thank you, which is my last coat, if you end up with a dry spot on there, it's going to be a real bear to try to fix that later on without getting a smeary glob buildup on the finish. So here's another place where this really thin section on the tip is nice, is I have a Roman ogee cut right on these inside openings here. So this lets me force it down inside that corner without building up a huge bunch of polyurethane that I'm later going to have to drag off of the wood somehow to keep it from running. So just do a nice smooth, again, don't move really fast with it, or the bubbles are going to build up. But you can go back and forth like I'm doing here, I always go in both directions just to make sure that it's pushing the finish equally in from both directions. And then up into these corners on the inside. flat edge. Again, you want to keep moving around, getting yourself in the right position with the lights to be able to see that you have a wet surface everywhere. This is the fourth coat on the thing. I use Minwax. I like using Minwax. That's just what I was weaned on many years ago in high school wood shop, and it's stuck with me because it's worked so well all these years. That was a good 40 years ago. So I use the Minwax Stain, wipe-on stain. I wipe stain on almost always with a rag. Almost never brush it, just again habit, and it worked for me. Then I put on a coat of clear, just thick, right as it comes out of the can. And it seems like the first coat is usually the hardest one to keep all the sags and runs out of. I don't know if it's because it's up against bare wood, or maybe it's because it's the first time you're working with that particular piece and you learn as you go each time. Even if you've done it dozens of times, it's a new experience each time. And I sanded in between coats with 320 sandpaper on every coat. So I put on two clear coats, and then I decided that I really like the wood to have a little bit darker color to it, because this is hickory wood. I jokingly refer to this as my hickory dickory clock because it's made out of hickory. And hickory is very dense, kind of like somewhere between oak and maple. And so it doesn't soak stain up real readily. So what I did, since it wasn't quite as dark as I'd like it to be, is I brushed on a coat of the Minwax one-step polyurethane that's got the color and the clear mixed in with it. As far as I know, that only comes in gloss. So I knew that if I did that on coat 3, there was going to be an obligatory coat 4 in order to get the semi-gloss finish back on. I just don't like having a high gloss finish on this type of work. So I put that third coat on of that the one-step color polyurethane, and that kind of nice too, because inevitably after sanding 2 or 3 times during the finishing, you tend to kind of hit the hard edges, the sharp edges, and take a little bit of the stained wood off, and that helps even stuff all out again. So now I'm back to the clear, and this is the semi-gloss Minwax quick drying polyurethane. The other thing is, I think that the more as you go on, after you get the first coat of polyurethane on, especially by the time you've got 2 or 3, I think because you've got a base of the polyurethane, that it helps absorb some of the volatiles in the mixture, and it kind of helps everything grab and not run and sag as much. And I keep using the terms running and sagging. I think of a run is where you have just kind of a thin little strip of the finish running down, and a sag more of where you can look at it from in the right light, and you can see an entire line there where it's just like the weight of it is kind of pulled down. Again, I always brush with gravity, no sense fighting against it, and again go very, very slowly and keep working it. You got a fair amount of time until you can't work it anymore. And of course at the very bottom, and especially in corners, is where it's going to tend to accumulate. Now, if you can look down in here, I'm going to purposely create a bunch of bubbles. I don't know if you can see them maybe from over on this angle. Here, I just made a bunch of bubbles in there. And here's how you can get rid of the bubbles real easily, is if you just lay it very, very lightly on there and drag it. across. Put almost no pressure at all on it, and it'll drag every one of the bubbles right out. So that's the importance of using a light touch on here. So that's all I'm gonna do for now. I'll get a picture of the whole thing when it's finished. So far I've done the very top section I call the crown, and then this is the head, this is the waist here, and there's the base all the way down bottom. And you can see all of the extra pieces that need to go along with this. The long skinny pieces go in the doors and the sides to hold the glass in once it's cut. I don't have that done yet. The plywood panels, that's hickory plywood that goes on the back in these three sections and then on the top. And then there's some frames over here that go on the inside on the hood that hold the fabric for letting the sound out, not that it wouldn't get out. These are the pieces for holding the clock works up against the face of the clock. There's the door for the hood, and then the door for the waist section. So anyway, that's my method for polyurethane. Hopefully that'll be of some use to you, because if you look on the internet, there's all kinds of people that have all kinds of problems putting on polyurethane, and like anything else, there's many examples of opinions out there. So this is just one way to do it. Thanks.